with an overview over the situation in Europe. And Tom Sauer, who is a professor of international politics at the University of Antwerpen in Belgium. He's also an expert on arms control and proliferation and disarmament. And he will give us the overview and then say something about the situation in Belgium. We have these 4 country reports too. After Tom Sauer, Peter Boes from the Netherlands will give us a country report. Peter Boes is a medical doctor, and he is the leading person, the chairperson of NVMP, I think. This is the IPPNW affiliate in the Netherlands. And then Lisa Clark from Italy, from Rete Disarmo e Rete Pace, a peace organization at the military bases in Italy, and also vice president of IPB, will talk to us and tell us about the situation in Italy. And then Johannes, who is a member of ICAN Germany and works as an aerospace engineer, he will talk about the situation in Germany, and he organized protest camps in Büchel at the military base, and he supports the campaign Atombomber nein danke, nuclear bomber no thanks. We made such a campaign in Germany. And then the discussion will be opened by Susie Schneider, and she coordinates the Don't Bank on the Bomb research and campaign as a part of her job and as a program manager of PAX for the Netherlands. And she's an expert on nuclear weapons with over 2 decades and experiences in work that intersect between nuclear weapons and human rights. So thank you very much that you all said you will be part of this webinar, and you will help us and you will support us. And we will now start with Tom Sauer.
Okay, thanks, Angelica. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Sauer. Let me first congratulate the organizers, IPB, ICAN, and IPPNW, for having organized this meeting. It's high time, and we are all doing as much as we can within our own countries, assuming that others would do the same in their respective countries. But sometimes 1 + 1 is not 2, but 3. In other words, let's coordinate and cooperate. It may make our life in our own countries easier thereafter. I'm not saying that up to now nothing has happened in this regard. ICAN Europe apparently doesn't exist, but it's still meeting on a regular basis, apparently. But the organizers of this webinar would like to lift this coordination and cooperation to a next level. And I couldn't agree more. So it's my pleasure to share my ideas. It will not be a full-fledged strategy for European peace movements that needs to be the subject of the upcoming webinars. Now, sometimes it's good to take a deep breath and look back. If you see from where we come, a gigantic arms race during the Cold War with thousands of US tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, the Euromissile crisis in the 1980s, the end of the Cold War, resulting in arms control treaties, and the hope for more. But the backlash since the mid-1990s, due to worsening geopolitical relations and growing domestic polarization in the United States, made that arms control and disarmament worldwide is stuck since 25 years. The number of nuclear weapon states is growing. All of the nuclear weapon states are modernizing their nuclear arsenals for $75 billion per year. And there's a substantial risk of nuclear terrorism. Some of us use this inertia, this crisis, as an opportunity to try something else, which became the humanitarian initiative, resulting in the best instrument we could have imagined, a treaty banning nuclear weapons. And that's revolutionary. Who would have imagined that 10, 15, or 20 years ago? So we should congratulate ourselves and use the resulting energy for the good. This TPNW, the ban treaty, should be the alpha and omega of everything we do from now. Every discussion we have with our adversaries should start and end by referring to this international legally binding treaty. Sure, it only binds the signatories, but it's an extremely clear and loud signal from the non-allied non-nuclear weapon states to the nuclear weapon states and their allies. Take your NPT Article 6, your disarmament obligations, serious. And I'm not going to repeat how the treaty came into being, but let's just remind us how Hannah Arendt, the famous political philosopher, operationalized power. It's power of the number. We won the debate because we outnumbered the opponents in the UN General Assembly. 122 non-nuclear weapon states versus 38 nuclear weapon states and allies. I would say never change a winning strategy. So let's make use of the power of the number again. It won't be easy, but with enough pressure, we may succeed. So what's the next step? The non-allied non-nuclear weapon states did their part of the job, together with ICAN and other peace organizations, by concluding the TPNW, the ban treaty. Which states are next in line? Ideally, we would like to see the nuclear weapon states change their policies, but that's not going to happen in the short term. The nuclear weapon states are still in shock with respect to the TPNW. They were and still are in complete denial. The nuclear weapon states simply did not expect that we would be able to realize the ban in such a short time frame. The nuclear weapon states are still in a phase of denial, using dismissive language vis-à-vis the TPNW and its advocates. So logically speaking, the countries that are next in line to move on nuclear disarmament are the states in between the nuclear weapon states and the non-allied non-nuclear weapon states, namely the allied non-nuclear weapon states. In short, the NATO allies and the US allies in Asia, Japan, South Korea, Australia. Today, we limit ourselves to the NATO allies and especially the host nations of US tactical nuclear weapons, being the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Belgium, my own country. Turkey is for different reasons a different case. If the allied non-nuclear weapon states are successful, and that will depend on us, then the focus will be even more than today on the nuclear weapon states. Nowadays, the nuclear weapon states can hide amongst this group of 40 allied states. Today, the nuclear weapon states, and especially the United States, can too easily justify their nuclear weapons policies by pointing to the allies. Let me give you two concrete examples. First, the modernization of the B-61 bomb, the tactical nuclear weapon here in Europe. This modernization has costed US taxpayers more than $10 billion for only a couple of 100 bombs. The few advocates of this modernization program inside DoD, the Defense Department, and Department of Energy in the United States, could only win this debate inside the United States because they were able to point to us, Europeans, who agreed with this modernization. I mean our governments, or better, the small nuclear priesthood in our countries. Second example, President Obama was personally in favor of switching to a no first use policy. He tried it again in 2016, in his last year, but failed. Not because of the Pentagon, but because of us, allies. So if we allies stop making nuclear claims, the nuclear military industrial complex in the United States will be hit. In short, by getting rid of these nukes in Europe, we also decrease the power of the nuclear priesthood in the nuclear weapon states. Next question, how? How are we going to succeed in getting these damned nuclear weapons that are already here since the 1950s out of our countries, out of the Netherlands, out of Germany, out of Italy, out of Belgium? Out of the 7,000 that were here, only 100 bombs remain nowadays. The numbers have continued to decrease without much fanfare. But we cannot assume that that's going to continue. And the last ones may be the most difficult to get rid of. So how are we going to succeed? From whatever angle you look to this question, you end up by concluding that in democracies, it's up to the government and the parliament to decide. And we, peace movements and the general public, elect our members of parliament and can lobby them once they are in power in the hope to change policy for the good. So a crucial actor for us are the political parties in power and the political parties that may come into power in the future. They have to understand that we want to change the policy. Small problem, nobody, except us, is talking about these nukes. So our first job is to put this issue back on the political agenda. How? How can we put this issue back on the political agenda? There are three instruments: lobby, protests, and media. Lobby means getting into contact with politicians in government and in parliament that are in power. Emailing them and their advisors, talk to them, convince them that we are living in a new era thanks to the TPNW, and that our country's policy is regarded as illegal by the rest of the world and by our own citizens. And with respect to the latter, surveys all point in the same direction. The majority of our population wants these tactical nuclear weapons withdrawn, and 80% wants our countries to sign the ban treaty. The power of the number. You remember? Most of us probably do already lobby, but our efforts should be intensified and get a European dimension. I will come back to that. Second, protests. It's my view that on this front we can make most progress. There have been protests in the 1980s, and we in Belgium had bomb spotting actions at the Air Force base in Kleine Brogel in the 1990s and beyond, but that's already a long time ago. It's time to start protesting again at the Air Force bases, with a smaller group in the beginning and hopefully more and more thereafter, at least until these protests are shown on television. And this brings me to the third instrument, the media. The mainstream media is largely absent in this debate, and the result is very negative. The larger public does not know anything anymore about these issues, let alone care about it. And as a result, politicians assume that nobody cares about it. So this negative spiral should be stopped. Yeah? That can only be stopped by actions, protests that are covered on television, just like the climate protests and Black Lives Matter are covered on television. The organizers of this webinar plan a month of protest at the bases in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany in September of this year. Certainly in the beginning, we should help each other to get a minimum number of people to attend. We Belgians should come and help protesting in the Netherlands and Germany. The Dutch should come to Kleine Brogel and Büchel, and the Germans should come to Volkel in Kleine Brogel. That's in principle possible because the dates are different and these bases are not very far from each other. And it creates an international dynamic amongst activists. Whether the protests are focused on halting the modernization of the bombs that's foreseen for 2022, or on the more general issue of withdrawal, it's up to the organizing committee and maybe ourselves in the upcoming webinars to decide. Other point, know your enemy. And know the arguments that they make. And distinguish real from fake arguments. Sometimes, also in peace movements, it's said that the problem is the money involved. That may be correct for the nuclear weapon states, but not for us allies. Not many people make a living out of these atomic bombs in Europe. Our main problem is a four-letter acronym, NATO. All our countries are members of the Atlantic Alliance, and nuclear weapons are an important part of the mix of instruments that NATO has available to defend our countries and to deter our so-called enemies, like Russia. We should try to dive deeper and ask the question why in particular it's so difficult for our countries to give up these atomic bombs in NATO. The answer that comes up most is deterrence. NATO needs these nuclear weapons to deter Russia. While that's the official NATO policy that is repeated by our national decision makers, it's a weak argument. Everybody knows that we are not going to use tactical nuclear weapons to protect the Baltic states and Putin as well. So yes, we have to reassure the Baltic states, but with credible means. That means instruments that can be used with conventional weapons, conventional deterrence, and we can win this debate. More difficult, by the way, however, is the argument of solidarity, responsibility sharing inside NATO. That's also used by our adversaries, that argument. And our countries have committed themselves, be it 60 years ago, to host these weapon systems. And NATO, the other member states, expect us to deliver, to keep doing that. Our politicians apparently find it very hard to go against these commitments, especially unilaterally. Now, that's the main reason why our governments and parliaments and members of parliament should coordinate their policies on a European level. Many of us would prefer that NATO as such stops to exist. That's not going to happen anytime soon. And that will be a recipe for not being able to convince the most conservative parties in our countries. So we need another strategy. We should focus like a laser beam on NATO's nuclear weapons policy. And if we succeed, we can go further. later on. Luckily, there's already a diversity of nuclear weapons policies within the alliance, and maybe it's not so much known. The alliance always presents itself as a unitary actor to the outside, but the member states are also divided on nuclear weapons. More in particular, 5 states have a so-called footnote policy and unilaterally stated from the beginning that they will never host atomic bombs. Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Spain, and Lithuania. So here comes my practical recommendation. We should convince our governments, thus the parties in the government, in Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and Italy, that we should follow in the footsteps of Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Spain, and Lithuania. It's not very difficult, no? That means staying clearly that our countries do not want to station nuclear weapons anymore on their territory. That would mean the end of the nuclear sharing story, except if other states in NATO will start hosting them. States like Poland would like to host tactical nuclear weapons, but I do not think that that will happen. So the end of nuclear sharing should be our main focus. Now, if we succeed, a next step could be, as I have pointed out in my NATO Watch piece, to decollectivize NATO nuclear weapons policy. We should stop saying that NATO is a nuclear alliance. Our governments could declare that they do not want to live under this nuclear umbrella anymore, and that we will not attend the NATO nuclear planning group meetings anymore, just like France nowadays. That would basically be the end of extended nuclear deterrence policy of the United States and Europe. If the nuclear weapon states inside NATO, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France want to keep their nuclear weapons temporarily, fine, but only for national purposes. The latter would at least make it possible for our states to accede to the ban treaty, as was already recommended last year by 56 former ministers of defense, foreign affairs, and prime ministers of our allied countries. As long as our countries have not acceded to the ban treaty, they can take 3 steps with respect to the ban treaty. Stop using the current dismissive tone towards the TPNW and its advocates, and show it at the next upcoming review conference of the NPT. Secondly, not vote against TPNW resolutions in the UN General Assembly anymore. And third, be present at the first meeting of states parties of the TPNW, at least as an observer. These would be constructive steps in the short term. Now, before concluding, let me say a few words about my own country, Belgium. The peace organizations that are most active on this issue are Vrede VZW, peace, with Ludo and Emmeline, Pax Christi Flanders, with a new working group on security and disarmament, led by Merel and by myself, and CNAPD in the French-speaking part, with Samuel and Olivier. Protest activities are planned on the 26th of September in Kleine Brogel Air Force Base. Also, a national petition will be launched. So we have, like everywhere, a public opinion that does not really care. That said, the latest survey of November 2020 shows that 77% of the people agree with us and not with the government. The current Belgian government exists of 7 parties. It's typically Belgian. French and Dutch-speaking Greens, French and Dutch-speaking Socialists, and French and Dutch-speaking Liberals, as well as Dutch-speaking Christian Democrats. That makes up 7. The parties that in principle agree with us are the Greens and the Dutch-speaking Socialists. So we have rather good contacts with them. The most conservative parties are the French-speaking Liberals, because they are close to the French and because they deliver the Minister of Foreign Affairs. But also the Dutch-speaking Liberals that deliver the Prime Minister and the French-speaking Socialists that deliver the Minister of Defense are rather hard to convince. In general, the issue is more alive in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium than in the French-speaking part. Now, the good news is the coalition agreement that dates back to 30th of September 2020, in which there was a positive reference to the ban treaty, which was a precedent inside NATO. The sentence does not say that Belgium is going to sign the treaty, but it says that the ban treaty could be seen as a stimulus for further multilateral nuclear disarmament. So it's now up to the Dutch and Germans and Italians to do better than us in their respective coalition agreements after the elections this year, at least for Germany and the Netherlands. Let's introduce an element of competition amongst ourselves now. Unfortunately, since September, the Greens and the Socialists in Belgium lost all internal debates.
you must come to an end.
Yes. I'm finishing.
Wonderful speaking, but excuse me.
I'm finishing. So we are losing, the Greens and the Socialists are losing the internal debates on this issue over the last months. Nevertheless, they want to move this issue in a positive direction gradually, especially the issue of the tech nukes. Especially if the review conference of the NPT would fail, the Greens and Socialists will take up the opportunity to ask for change, although it remains to be seen what that will mean in practice. Good news is also that, and that I will end with that, is that I have heard that European coordination has started amongst members of parliament. Belgian Greens have talked to the German Greens, and FEPS hosted the seminar for the Socialist members of parliament. Belgian one attended that, and Germans and Dutch as well. And with PAC-60 Flanders, we also had a chance to talk to the leader of the Dutch-speaking Christian Democrats, and he was in principle open for change as well. So to conclude, let's use the energy that was released after the ban treaty for getting rid of the tech nukes in Europe. And now I give the floor back to you, Angelica.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom, for these great ideas, a lot of ideas in a short time. Especially that you pointed out to say we, the allied countries and the governments, and of course we, the people, we are responsible and we have to use our energy. So I want to give now the floor to Peter Buys. Peter, please start. Peter, your microphone.
Peter, I think you're still muted.
Peter, we don't hear you.
So stupid. Forgot to mute.
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
It's off my time, of course. Yeah. Angelica, thank you for this initiative and for organizing it. Tom, for your kickoff. You know, the kickoff of Holland, Belgium, in soccer terms, in former days, it was always competition. And now we have that competition in coalition agreements. We, in 2017, with the center right-wing government, we had, because of our actions, get into the coalition agreement, the quote, "This government is actively pursuing a nuclear weapon-free world." Never happened before. Now you improved it with your 30th of September coalition agreement, and it's up to us after the elections to improve that furthermore in the right direction. My affiliate, IPPNW affiliate, is being active since a couple of years on this issue from the position of to pressure Dutch politics that nuclear weapons are, from medical humanitarian perspective, absolutely unacceptable weapons. That will cost millions and millions of suffering, so if not more, and no help available, and the billions of money can much better be spent, especially now we have the COVID experience, to better humanitarian purposes. And our politicians are not absolutely deaf for that, as I will tell later on. We, as MVMP, we did a lot on ourselves, but also a lot together with a civil society coalition we initiated in 2016, called the Bali Beraad for a Nuclear Weapon-Free World. And it comprised, among others, the churches, the Red Cross, Mayors for Peace, Pukwash, Greenpeace since last year, and we have and a lot of other PACs is also among us, and Ialana. So together we try to find ways also to pressure on the politicians, and not without success in the last years. And now we are especially eager to do that, because we had the elections in Holland, and already last summer we started to formulate together 6 urgent recommendations to the political parties to take into account and to incorporate in their election programs. And the 6 points are very briefly. The Netherlands will further intensify its active commitment to a nuclear weapon-free world. Our country will intensify its role as initiator and bridge builder within and outside the Non-Proliferation Treaty, with emphasis put on disarmament obligations under the Article 6. The last nuclear weapon task must be phased out. That is the nuclear sharing, of course. The Netherlands starts the debate on alternatives to the credible nuclear deterrence concept. The Netherlands signs and ratifies the UN Treaty of Prohibition on Nuclear Weapons, and to shift expenditures from weapon towards expenditures for diplomacy and addressing the root causes of war, like there is inequality, poverty, climate change, access to water, etc., etc. So, well, and to our surprise, a lot of political parties, 9 together, incorporated, not only by this, I hope, but anyway, this urgent recommendations, especially on the nuclear sharing and on the TPNW. And also the major winner of our elections, Susie had made an oversight of the situation after our elections, very handsome, very handy. And D66 is the party with a lot of a winning party, the second now in the country, has always been on this issue quite constant and positive. And it says, for example, in its election program, internationally, the Netherlands is a proponent of mutual dismantling of nuclear weapons and preventing more nuclear weapons. Will try to strengthen the treaties on nuclear weapons, and especially signing the TPNW and the Joint Strike Fighter. It will not have the dual capacity, so the possibility of having nuclear bombs. So now, after the elections last week, we have already had a meeting with the Bali Beraad partners, and we have another within 2 weeks to come up with action models to influence the period of forming a new government. Like we did 4 years ago, and not without success. We have good connections with several parties, especially with this D66, who will have the task to get this into a coalition agreement in a way, opposed probably by the biggest party for many years already in our country. As you may know, a very right-wing liberal party, VVD, of our Prime Minister Rutte. So it will be quite a fight and a reason to raise our civil society voice to pressure in the right direction. And according to the points Tom already said, lobbying, protest, media in Holland, definitely a problem to get this issue into radio and especially television. But we will have new opportunities here. Angelica, how many minutes do I have left?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. Well, Holland was one of the founders of NATO, and from 59 nuclear weapons, 7 nuclear tasks we had, and after the wall came down, only 1 has left finally, but we have to get rid of it. Especially when we look to the NATO report, it was a link in our invitation, and chapter 2.5, main findings, moving toward NATO 2030. On the 4 pages, the word nuclear disarmament is totally absent. And although because of the Dutch in 2016, it's NATO was forced to put it in the final document of the Warsaw Top. NATO is actively pursuing a nuclear weapon-free world, and Article 6, etc., etc. Now, nothing of this. Even the P5 last year were more positive about nuclear disarmament, total nuclear disarmament in their declarations. And NATO says in number 7, NATO should continue and revitalize the nuclear sharing arrangements that constitute a critical element of NATO's deterrence policy. So I think we have to find ways to make clear not only that a lot of our high percentages of our population is against nuclear weapons and in favor of the TPNW, but maybe we have to come up with a kind of appeal signed by well-known European writers, doctors, scientists, religious figures, whatever, with a key line that we don't want to be defended any longer by weapons which could mean any moment the end of us and the end of the rest of civilization. And I'm convinced that a lot of people want to sign a declaration like that to make clear to NATO and the REFCON and whatever is coming up that in Europe there is a movement starting to get rid of these horrible and totally unacceptable weapons. So thank you, Angelica. And in the discussion we can elaborate on several things.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your talk and also for your proposal for a European appeal and the lobby work you did. And now Lisa Clark will tell us about all the actions and what's going on in Italy.
Thank you, Angelica. And thank you, Peter. I love that idea of a sort of contemporary, oh, am I not, is it okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Of a contemporary Russell Einstein appeal that we could draw up as Europeans. I think that would be, I think that's a very good idea, actually.
Grazie, my lady.
And I'm also, I will try and fit in some of the comments on some of the things that Tom said, which I found very interesting. Mind you, I was always sure, Tom, that those weapons that are still in Italy, that we only nuclear weapons, that we only really discovered were there in 2005. I don't know about you lot, but we thought they had all gone, that they had gone with the bigger things, but those ones were still there, and Hans Christensen told us in 2005. Well, we then worked out that, and this is something I've always said and written, they stayed there throughout all those years, from the end of the Cold War to 2005, simply because the Italians wanted them there, not the US. I'm sure of that, because it made the Italians feel, every Italian government, well, center left and center right, it made them feel a little bit more allies than the others that don't have nuclear weapons. So this is something we must never forget. And in the secrecy of their government rooms, there are still people who think like that, I'm afraid, even though so many years have passed. However, our campaign, this campaign that I'm going to be telling you about, called Italia Ripensaci, actually started with the ban treaty. It's a ban treaty campaign in 2016, when Italy voted against the idea of the proposal in the UN, in the first committee, I think it was, to convene a commence negotiations on a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. And we thought that Italy had made a mistake, because actually in international treaties, Italy had always had a very good performance, a very good history. It was one of the leaders on the convention on the landmines. It was the first country to ratify the cluster munitions. It's a country that is slightly hypocritical, let me say this, because then it agrees with all sorts of other warmongering policies and ideas. But on the outright moral issues, ethical issues, I think it's because it has the Vatican on its soil, but because of that, it has always been pretty good up front. It was the leader, for example, on the moratorium against the death penalty, Italy. And it's never had a death penalty, though, so it wasn't hypocritical in that sense. In any case, we thought it was a mistake, and we thought it would be very easy to convince Italy to jump on the wagon of the ban treaty, imagining that they would then shift here and there and not actually do what they were supposed to do in time, but that they would not say no. But they haven't. It's incredible. It's been since 2016. Anyway, so we started our campaign that way, and we decided we were going to concentrate our campaign on two aspects of the ban treaty's consequences on public opinion. One is we wanted to educate the people. We wanted to inform. We wanted to inform people exactly what it was all about. And I think there we've done a pretty good job. And the other is we wanted to show how the stigma of the ban treaty, the stigma of nuclear weapons brought in by the ban treaty and all those negotiations was actually how it could begin to work. And if I tell you a few of the things that we've done in these few years, I think that I can show you that we've succeeded. We have now over 200 city council resolutions addressed to the national government, saying that this city approves of the TPNW and asks the national government to sign that treaty. In most of the cases where this was voted in city councils, nobody voted against. It was unanimously approved, which means it doesn't mean that everyone all of a sudden was a convert to nuclear disarmament. It means that the more militaristic forces are now too embarrassed in public to say that they're in favor of nuclear weapons. I'm pretty sure of this. The education aspect, that when you say that you don't think there's much going on, well, we have, within ICAN, we have done, for 4 times now, we have done opinion polls, which are organized outside of Italy. They're organized by YouGov. It's an international organization. It's serious stuff. It's not done by us Italians that, you know, we sort of tend to cook the books and change the figures. It's done officially. Well, in 2019, when the people were asked, do you think Italy should join the TPNW? 70% said yes. In this latest poll, which we chose to publish on the 22nd of January as our entry into force, one of our entry into force activities, but actually the poll was done in second half of November, it's 87% who say that Italy should join the ban treaty. But what's even more interesting is the number of the people who believe that Italy should not join the ban treaty has remained at the same figure of 5%. 5% in 2019, 5% in 2021. And so it means that there is 17% more people who no longer say, I don't know. They say they know, and they answer, and they say, we want to join the TPNW. Anyway, we've tried to enlarge the coalition as much as possible. And on the 22nd of January, we worked very hard. Also, we were helped in this because January is, for the Catholic Church in Italy, is the month of peace and the month of peace actions and marches and so on, even though it's cold. But so we had that. But on the 22nd of January, we had on the northeast of the country where the US Air Force base in Aviano is, we had 7 dioceses with bishops running them, endorsing the activities for the 22nd of January to celebrate the entry into force of the TPNW, speaking from the church pulpits about this. In Brescia, which is where Gedi is, the Italian air base with the nuclear sharing planes, in Brescia we had an incredible number, 165 grassroots NGOs endorsing the celebrations for the entry into force, and 56 local government authorities, mayors and others, all of them had printed a poster. I designed a poster, and all the cities had to do was put their emblem on top of it, and then they could print it out and hang it in City Hall, saying, "We, citizens of X, Y, Z, welcome the entry into force of the TPNW and will not stop until Italy has decided to join." So 56 of them, 160, there was a lot going on. And then they all went and stood under the freezing cold rain in front of the base at Gedi. And we had the church bells ringing. I don't know, I think my time must be up. I'm sorry, Angelica, but I have millions of other things I'd like to tell you, but I wanted to show to Tom that there is a lot going on in Italy. And it's mea culpa, the fact that we haven't communicated. There is something wrong there, and that I agree with. But some people learn about what we are doing because Ambassador Kickert, whom I'm sure some of you know and remember from the UN, he was the Austrian ambassador in New York to UN. He is now, as of January, the ambassador to Italy. And he wrote to us because he wanted to get to meet us. And so now we're working on our next resolution in Parliament, because one of the things I didn't mention is that we did get a resolution through Parliament in 2017 saying that the government should give the legal institutes of our institutions, give the legal offices the task of examining precisely what the consequences would be to NATO, to Italy's NATO commitments if it signed the ban treaty. It then didn't do anything, but they approved it in Parliament. So we're going to do another one of those resolutions this year. And since they always have hearings beforehand in the Foreign Affairs Committee or something, Ambassador Kickert is willing to come and join us on that. And we are, of course, also going to ask that Italy send a proper high-level delegation as an observer to the Member States Conference in January. I'm sure there's many of other things I could have told you, but I think I've given you a fair picture.
Lisa, thank you very much for this inspiring speech of you and all the cities, city councils that you engaged, and the bishops and of the church. I will tell it to the Catholic community here. And now we go on, thank you very much, we go on to Johannes Oehler, and he will start his presentation. Please, Johannes.
Yeah, now you can hear me. It's not exactly working as it should be, but
we can hear you. Just go ahead.
Okay, I hope you can see my presentation. I prepared some slides. Thank you all for organizing the event. Thank you also, Tom. I think you helped me to make my presentation a bit shorter. I will finish on time then, because I won't have to repeat some of my arguments. Yeah, I'm Johannes from ICAN Germany, and yeah, we're gonna talk about the end of nuclear sharing, and I'll tell you about the situation in Germany. First, tiny overview. You all know about that. I think it visualizes nicely how there is still more than 100 tactical nuclear weapons of mass destruction all around Europe. And yeah, I'll mainly focus on Büchel Air Base in Germany. I'll give a brief outlook on history, then second on the Büchel Air Base. Third, I'll talk about scenarios for use, what would happen, what are they there for, and then about the future of nuclear sharing in Germany. Nuclear sharing started in 1958. We've heard that. There was a long debate, 25th of March. The context, history, I think is clear to everybody. I'll try to reduce that and cook it down to one interesting fact that I found basically, and I think it could be helpful still for us. It's a footnote of history that in that 4 days parliamentary debate, the opposition party, then Social Democrats, they argued that putting nuclear warheads, nuclear bombs on German soil should not be linked to NATO membership. And I think it's really interesting to see that 63 years ago, this argument was there already from nuclear sharing supporters, and we're still getting to hear it today. And it's a fake argument. We've heard about, Denmark, Iceland, Spain, countries that refuse to host nuclear weapons that are still NATO partners. So this is not an argument we should have to fear. All right, then Büchel Air Base, another picture, you know probably how these air bases look like. Silos for nuclear weapons and for aircraft. Here there's the main entrance and the roundabout where we usually organize our protests. I hope some of you might have been there and know that place. Yeah, the situation there is now we're facing the opposite of nuclear disarmament. New aircrafts, improvement of the facilities, new fences, runway at huge cost, and then the B6112, which I will not go into detail. Yeah, but this is quite shocking that we see we're not going in the right direction. We're moving away from removing these weapons if we're not about to act and make much progress. Now to the third part, using these weapons of mass destruction. I hope it's, for everyone who is here attending today, we know that this is what we definitely have to prevent. But I still said, okay, let's look into 3 possible cases. First would be protecting partners in Eastern Europe, Baltic states, or Poland from a conventional attack. Second, retaliating a nuclear attack. And third, using them for a first strike. And just for those who are not already convinced that nuclear weapons must never be used, this is also a helpful argument for those people that these weapons that are in these air bases, they don't serve any purpose. In case we use them in the Baltics, the consequences are catastrophic. There's thousands or 100,000s of people killed in a most cruel way. It's small countries. The country would be devastated, and the society would be basically wiped out, the culture destroyed if you explode such a weapon there. It would just mean all the history, the architecture, and artwork is everything gone. So I hope we've learned some lessons from the past, and nobody seriously thinks about doing that. But it also shows there is no credible defense, because you cannot defend somebody. You cannot say we defend you with nuclear weapons that basically mean your country will be wiped out. For the second option, retaliating a nuclear attack, simply because of technical limitations, it's not realistic. The autonomy of the current aircraft does not allow them to fly a nuclear warhead on Russian territory. It won't happen. Also, it couldn't get across the air defense, since yeah, it's just not capable of that. It's an old aircraft. And then I found an interesting study from 1987 about these dual key provisions that assure that there's no unauthorized access and use of these weapons. It would take 24 to 60 hours, even in Cold War settings when this was regularly trained, to put that weapons into use. And just as a comparison, it is estimated that it would take about 50 hours, 2 days, in case of a war for Russia to conquer the capitals of the Baltic states. So I think this is also not a relevant or a use case that is realistic. And same holds for first strike. I don't have to change the arguments. If it takes 25 hours or more, these weapons are useless. They are an easy target. Everybody knows they are there, so they don't serve any purpose. That's the point, basically. So now let's jump to that, what is more relevant for us. The Tornado aircraft is gonna be retired. It's an aircraft from the 70s, developed in Europe, and there's a couple of options for new aircraft. I think I don't want to bore you with any of the details. I just decided to show a picture of two of these ugly tornadoes. And these are the two most, the two options that are most realistic if you ask the Ministry of Defense, the Eurofighter and the F-18 jet. They're pressing for the US model, that one. If you ask me, if you ask any of us, probably, then I would say, no thanks, we don't want that. This is the logo of our campaign. We've got loads of stickers, and I think it was a quite successful campaign. As a first step, we wanted to inform parliamentarians, to tell them this decision is not about another war toy. It's about being capable of delivering weapons of mass destruction, murdering hundreds of thousands of people. And I think that was important because a lot of people, even in the parliament, decision makers, were not aware of that. And also in the course of that campaign, we tried to get in contact with people from different parties who were involved in that decision. And now at least it's postponed, and the Social Democrats moved in a direction that they said we first need a proper debate on nuclear sharing before we can decide for a new aircraft. Thank you, Lisa, first for the very positive things you said. It made me, it really lifted my mood. And I try to also finish with some positive remarks. There's some positive momentum. At January 22nd, the Scientific Advisory Board of our Parliament claimed the TPNW does not conflict the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It does also not conflict NATO membership, even though it might bring some difficulties, but there's no legal conflict. And this is very powerful for us because we can use that argument for anybody, also for the conservatives. And as a very last point, I would like to just invite you to think about what would happen if tomorrow the Parliament of Germany or one of the other host nations would decide it's forbidden for pilots to deliver nuclear warheads. That basically, that is possible. We could put an end unilaterally tomorrow to nuclear sharing. Do you think Germany or one of the other countries would have to leave NATO? Do you think other countries would say, well, without nuclear weapons, we don't want you anymore? I think it's exactly the opposite. Nobody would try to push a country out of NATO. And this is it's just another, it's that old fake argument. It just would not would not happen. That's a bit more detail into the German situation. Let me just say, we're working with we have got elections coming, and we're working on the Green election program and on the Social Democrats election program, because it could be much more ambitious. We have large support in Germany for the TPNW. And this year's September 26th is a special day because we will hold elections in Germany, but it will also be the Nuclear Abolition Day. And I hope that in many ways, it will be a day that enables a political landscape in Europe that is much better for us and that enables a nuke-free Europe at last. Okay, that is just a picture at the end. I would like to invite each and every one of you to our protest week. It's always happening around July 7th, where the birthday of the TPNW was. And yeah, you can look at our website, buchel.nuclearban.de, or write me personally. I would be very happy to see some of you this summer in Buchel.
Thank you very much. Johannes, you have given us a great talk and some new ideas, invited the people to Buchel, so that we have hopefully with no more Corona, more direct connections in Europe. And let's see if we can do that, and also talked a little bit about the German situation and the elections that are before us. So now I want to start the discussion with Susie's input. Susie, where are you?
I'm right here. Thank you very much, Angelica. And thanks everybody. I think that we have seen very clearly what the lay of the land is. And many of our organizations are European-based members of ICAN, and it's a great mechanism for us to come together and talk about how we're changing the dynamic around nuclear weapons. And so just as a reminder, if your organization is not a member of ICAN but would like to be, it's a cool campaign. Join it. The link is in the chat. Going ahead, I think we need to focus on a couple of things. First off, the countries that already joined the treaty are working on the full implementation of the treaty. And we need to support and be in solidarity with campaign colleagues around the world. And that means getting everybody to do their declarations. It means looking at victim assistance, environmental remediation, these cool provisions that are part of the only treaty that makes nuclear weapons illegal. One of the other cool things about the treaty itself is it requires the members to encourage others to join. And that means we have interesting allies in some international forums. And those who have already joined have to speak up, and we can push them to speak up. So things that like European Commission meetings, EU Action Service, European Parliament, those who are coming from countries across Europe who have already joined the treaty, Austria, Ireland, and so on, they should be calling on others to join in those settings, because that's going to help shift those outside the treaty, and those are our countries. And you know, last year, you might remember, I guess in September or so, we tried to do this effort to push the countries outside, the countries that have nuclear weapons in their security strategies, to change their perspective on the treaty. And one of the tools that was mentioned here sort of in a way was we had a sign-on letter where 56 former ministers joined a letter calling on countries to join the ban treaty. The link's in the chat if you hadn't had a chance to look at that. Similar actions could elevate this type of thing again, but one of the things that made that successful was keeping it short, keeping it focused, just as I'm going to try to do with my talk. As we've done, and we've, you know, one of the things, I mean, everybody on this call, looking at the attendee list, you have all worked so hard, and I celebrate and congratulate your efforts in getting municipal leaders and mayors to join on and to support the treaty, to support an end to nuclear weapons. Lisa mentioned more than 200 city council resolutions in Italy. I don't know how many how many countless cities in Germany flew the flag celebrating that nuclear weapons are illegal this past January. We can also raise the stakes and go back to these mayors. Go back to these mayors, go back to these city councils, as a number of councils in Scotland are doing, some in the US are doing, and going back and asking them to make sure the city doesn't do business with companies that are involved in producing nuclear weapons, that the city's pension funds or any funds that they might be responsible for are not invested in those companies that are involved in producing nuclear weapons. There's a link in the chat for a city guide that we put together for how to build this up based on some of the experiences that we've had, because we have moved cities to move their money. All of this contributes to stigmatizing the prohibited behavior because nuclear weapons are illegal. We need to claim this. We need to say it loud and to be proud and make those who want to explain that it's not illegal for them, make them explain it. We don't need to explain it for them. Nuclear weapons are illegal. Let's put those who want to defend nuclear weapons on the back foot. And I work a lot on the stigma side of things. And so I think it's really important that we are loud and we are proud, and we have some great opportunities in the coming year to really elevate this. One thing is the B-61 modernization, the bombs that are stored in our countries. This was mentioned before. They're in the process. Boeing is making a new guided tail kit. They're being applied to the new bombs. But in order for that to happen, they have to physically leave. They are leaving our countries. So we can consider all sorts of creative actions to make sure they don't come back. And I am confident that we can work closely with partners and allies where they're going, who also know they don't want them to come back here. So we should look at how we can make sure they never come back. Get out, go home, don't come back. We can also look at the annual exercises and use this as a moment to stigmatize behavior. In the Q&A, Alexandra Shu from Denmark raised this issue, the snowcat exercises. And I think we should consider partnering around this across the 17 or so countries that are involved in snowcat. And maybe what we could do is get some former military folks, get some former defense folks, get some defense think tank people, people who are not associated with the peace and justice community per se, because their voices are heard differently on nuclear weapons. And we can use that because they also know nuclear weapons are just plain dumb, let alone being expensive and now illegal. But maybe we could do a joint op-ed that's published in multiple papers across the continent in the countries that participate, especially countries like Norway, Denmark, where they have a reputation as being voted the best place in the world to live over and over and over. Well, it's not a good place to live when your country is complicit in threatening to indiscriminately murder civilians with nuclear weapons. So we can elevate that. And I'm not going to talk more about the month of action at the bases because I know that's going to come up, but I do encourage when we do these actions, we need to make sure to get great photos because they are worth 1,000 words and more. There was a webinar a couple of months ago on how to really do good photos from actions. And I put the link in the chat. Tom, when he opened up today, he talked about don't change a winning strategy. And I think that's right. And I'm fully with you. And for me, a lot of times that is a focus on the consequences, because there's no way that a nuclear weapon can be used without causing a catastrophe. There's no help if they are used. There's no Red Cross with soup and blankets. There's just suffering and destruction, some of which can last for decades. And there's no argument against it either. But still, lots of people don't know. So our creative actions include constant public education. And every single one of the speakers here talked about this. But it works. If we're clear and we are consistent, it works. Lisa mentioned the public opinion polls over the last couple of years. And we've done them across a lot of our countries. We saw a change in the Dutch public perception around the ban treaty, around the use of nuclear weapons. We saw an increase of 15% for support in the ban treaty. Why? Because our message was simple. Nuclear weapons destroy indiscriminately, but there is hope through this treaty. I think it's really important to consider that we actually offer hope, and we have that possibility now. So I think our efforts, especially in NATO countries, our efforts really serve to stigmatize the weapons, to identify, name, and shame those who are complicit in keeping those weapons around. And together, we need to celebrate those who rise and resist and keep each other strong. That's why this effort to bring us together here to share information is so valuable. And I'm so grateful for the chance. Because remember, they said we'd never get nuclear armed countries to an international meeting focused on the consequences of these weapons. And then we did. They said we'd never get a treaty negotiated, let alone in the UN system. And then we did. They said this treaty would never enter into force. It would never really be law. And then it happened. And in the middle of a global pandemic, no less. They try to say that this treaty doesn't matter, but we know it does. And together, we're proving it every day. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to you, Angelica, and let's keep this conversation going. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Susie, for these ideas and your roundup of the different strategies you showed us. When you talked about, this is something I would like to add, when you talked about don't bang the bomb approach, we have in Germany a big organization who does make divestment campaigns on coal, but also against armament. It's called Urgewalt. And we had in 2 years now, the last 2 years, a protest against, in front of the banks, against nuclear weapons and armament and coal. And this is a way we could put together young people from the climate movement with the peace movement. And it was easy for us to organize that. So I would want to ask the others, are there similar approaches to combine in some way or the other the climate movement and the peace movement and the anti-nuclear weapons movement?